From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Hasn't been the easiest week for Providence Mayor Brett Smiley. A dispute over a Palestinian flag at City Hall has grabbed the public's attention and forced the mayor to consider a flag policy to stave off future controversy. This as the mayor seeks legislative approval for a steep hike in property taxes. Plus,
not guilty.
A long-running trial in the so-called naked fat test case has come to an end, but further fallout could be on the horizon. And
the bill is passed.
What could President Trump's mega bill on taxes and spending mean for southern New England? We break down the big headlines this week with the Reporters Roundtable. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi for this Reporters Roundtable. We're keeping it in-house. Target 12 investigators Eli Sherman and Alexandra Leslie, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Great to be here.
So Alex sat down with Providence Mayor Brett Smiley this week for a wide-ranging interview throughout the show. We're going to bring some parts of that conversation, and I want to start here, Alex. The mayor is considering implementing a flag policy for Providence City Hall. As we said in the top of the program, this after some city councilors raised the Palestinian flag there. You asked him about it. Let's take a listen.
So the city, and frankly every city and town in Rhode Island and the state, we all have a tradition of raising certain flags, and it's almost always done without controversy, and it's usually done in a way that helps celebrate a culture and actually bring our community together. We raised the Italian flag on St. Joseph's Day, the Irish flag on St. Patrick's Day, the Pride flag during the month of June, and I'd like to be able to continue to do so. So I don't plan on instituting an American flag only policy. I don't think that's necessary, and I think that denies an opportunity for us to celebrate members of our community. What I am looking for is to deny the opportunity for one person to raise a flag that is divisive and not healthy for our community.
Providence Mayor Brett Smiley sitting down with Alex. I got to tell you, this just through a legal lens and a First Amendment lens, i.e. free speech, this could be a really tricky needle for the mayor to thread here. I mean, is he expecting pushback to this?
Yeah, I think he is. We talked about how he's looking at a Supreme Court ruling from 2022 where the court ruled that the city of Boston violated free speech rights when they refused to fly a Christian flag outside of City Hall there in 2017. So the city ended up paying over $2 million to settle that case. Obviously, he wants to avoid opening the city up to something like that. And Boston has since passed an ordinance that clarifies the rules for flags.
What is that? Do you know what that looks like?
Yeah, so they want to fly the U.S. flag, the state flag, and the city flag in that order. But then they also say that flagpoles are really not intended to, serve as a forum for public expression. And they said that the flags of governments recognized by the U.S. are okay. Flags in conjunction with certain ceremonies or events, maybe like a St. Joseph's Day celebration.
Yeah, the tricky
flags of sports teams.
The tricky part is when you're targeting speech, right? When you're saying we can fly all these flags, but we can't fly this one. That's a form of speech, and if you're like suppressing speech, that's when the lawsuits start getting filed and all that. So either it's like you can't fly any flags but the American in the city of Providence and sort of have it like content neutral and no one gets offended type of a thing, then it's probably on safer ground. Yeah, either way, it's a political problem.
I thought it was interesting. He said, I don't want to put up flags that are divisive. Like, what flags
is divisive?
Exactly. I agree. Who's defining that and all that? It's tricky. Probably not a situation he wants to be in. I'm going to majorly shift gears. Mega bill. House Republicans approved this big bill encompassing President Trump's agenda this week. It was dubbed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Ted, zero in on what it could mean to this region, Rhode Island, southeastern Mass.
Yeah, it's always hard with these huge reconciliation bills where they're doing a million different policy changes in one. It's like 1,000+ pages. But the things I'm watching the most closely, Medicaid, obviously, we've all heard a lot about it. For beneficiaries, because they're going to try to put in some new requirements that would, they think, like lead to millions of people not having health insurance anymore. But also then the effects on the health system in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, where if less money's flowing in from the Fed from Medicaid, that's the underlying goal. That's less money flowing into the health system, which we've been talking about a lot on this show. SNAP, the food stamp program, similarly, they're trying to bring down the cost of that through work requirements. There's actually an interesting thing where they want to make the states pay for part of it if your error rate is high. Rhode Island's error rate is high, so there's some worry about that at the State House. For the average taxpayer, people might be happy to hear the House bill, at least here, raises the SALT deduction, your ability to deduct your state and local income taxes, which big issue in blue states, from $10,000 to $40,000. So for people with high property tax bills, that could make a difference. Offshore wind, there's a lot of back and forth about clean energy stuff. Rhode Island and Massachusetts have put a lot of chips in on the offshore wind industry, building out things. So how would that affect projects down the line? And then the last one I had on my list here was kind of macro, which is the debt that would be added to the federal debt with this bill, because it's not all paid for.
Is it nearly $4 trillion?
That sounds right. And it's, these numbers are a little slippery. It's trillions of dollars. It's not deficit neutral by any means on a debt that's already quite high. That would be pressure to keep interest rates high. And a lot of the other problems we're all talking about on the news regularly are interest rate problems. Why projects can't get done affordably, because it's expensive to finance. Why people can't buy a home as easily, because mortgage rates are 7% still. So if the federal government is not going to go into belt tightening mode anytime soon, which it doesn't look like under this mode, that's going to keep pressure on in the economy to keep interest rates high, with all the effects we know that has.
Which was some of the headwind that this bill faced, with some House Republicans thought it was just too much money. But just real quick, want to point out, this thing's still in the meat grinder.
Very much
so it could change.
Yeah, so the House passed it. So it's in the Senate now. They do claim they want to have it done by the 4th of July. That's going to be tough, I think, but we'll see what they do. But senators have some very different priorities. But then whatever they do to the bill, it has to go back to the House and get through again, where it passed by one vote. So I saw a line from Speaker Johnson this morning. He said something like it was like a tightrope made of dental floss or something like that. It was a good line. That's kind of what they're up to here.
All right, back local. Eli, it's not the first time, but FBI agents were in North Providence a couple of weeks ago, and they're interested in cement.
Yeah, kind of a weird one. Twice, I think last week, the FBI agents visited a station house, a fire station house on Fruit Hill Ave, and they were asking questions about a project that happened there a few years ago. Mm-hmm. We don't have many details, and of course, the feds aren't telling us anything about it, which is normal. But this is all coming against the backdrop of a lawsuit that the mayor is facing from a former employee who says that he was hired by the city but then asked to do work on the mayor's personal property. So there's just a lot bubbling up in North Providence. Initially the mayor didn't want to talk about this pending lawsuit, but actually he did talk to you.
Yeah, I got him on the phone as we were reporting this story out. And look, we should know we have nothing that says he's the target of an FBI investigation. And in fact, he said to me on the phone, I talked to the fire chief. He said they weren't asking questions about me.
Yeah, he wasn't too worried about it.
Wasn't too worried about it. But I pressed him, don't you want to look into this a little bit more? And he wanted to be very, very hands-off.
And a lot of people at State House connecting this to the fact that Council President Dino Audiello is not running for Dominic Ruggiero's vacant Senate seat. He's the council president. He's next in line to be mayor. He'd obviously be a candidate for mayor if that seat were to open up. As you say, no sign that Mayor Lombardi's in any trouble, but anytime you hear the words FBI around any administration, it gets people talking about what could happen next if somebody was no longer able to keep the job.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, the naked fat test trial is over, but more is on the horizon in this case. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers.
At this time, Aaron is not going to make any statements because there are further proceedings, but we'd like to thank the jury for their attention, their hard work, and for their verdict. We are very satisfied that the jury saw the case as we saw it, no sexual intent whatsoever.
Welcome back to this Reporters Roundtable. I'm Tim White. This is Eli Sherman. We are joined by Alexandra Leslie. You sure? You're Ted Nesi. This is Eli Sherman. This is Alexandra Leslie. I'm rusty, and why I'm rusty is because I haven't been in this on this set for a month.
That's right.
We were covering the Aaron Thomas trial. You just heard from John McDonald, the defense attorney for Aaron Thomas. He was acquitted of the two most serious sex crime charges: the felony second-degree child molestation, second-degree sexual assault, convicted of two misdemeanor battery counts. So, Eli, for those who have not heard our analysis on this, and we have a special on our 12 Plus TV app if people want to get in depth on this trial. A lot of people don't understand the verdict because Thomas admitted to being alone with naked students over 3 decades, hundreds of them, yet the jury acquitted him on the most serious charges. Explain why it landed where it did, you think.
Yeah, I mean, this was not a murder trial, right? This was a sex crimes trial, and unlike a murder trial where there may be a gun, and I've said this before, with fingerprints on it and
physical evidence
that shows you, okay, this defendant did it. That didn't exist in this case. So it really came down to a he said versus he said situation, and these former students were saying that this happened and there was illegal sexual contact. Then Aaron Thomas took the stand and he said, no, that's not true. And that's a lot for the jury to ask. And one thing I've been thinking about too, Tim, is that 600 people went through this. And so when people hear that, they think, oh my goodness, there's just so many people who could come forward with testimony about it. But there were only 2 complaining witnesses, and in part because of how narrow the law is, only a couple people actually fit into the criteria
because of
to make
statute of
accusations.
limitations. Yeah.
Correct.
All right.
So, when you look back and standing back looking in, you think there's so many people that are accusing him, but the jury only got to consider 2 people's testimony and whether or not it fit into the crime. So what they were looking at was a lot more narrow, I think, than people might have thought.
All right, well, stay tuned on this one. June 26th, he's scheduled to be sentenced on the misdemeanor charges, scheduled that could move. So we'll see what happens there. He faces up to 1 year for each of those misdemeanor counts and a $1,000 fine. Let's go back to Providence. Alex, in your interview with the mayor, the House Committee on Municipal Government and Housing approved a request by Providence to give them the ability to raise property taxes above the 4% tax limit. This is not unique to Providence. All municipalities have to do this if they want to raise the tax limit. Yeah. I think the mayor's budget is like 620 something million.
624.
Okay. But this was a big hurdle for the mayor to cross, right? Right,
because this is the first time that a vote was held on this bill, and now it's out of committee. It still has hurdles to face in both chambers. But if it didn't pass the other night, then basically we'd have to go back to the drawing board for the budget. And right now that's kind of on the council to do so. It's in the finance committee. They're vetting all department budgets right now. So if it didn't pass then, they'd get a start on revamping the budget. That still could happen though, as it faces more hurdles again in both chambers.
You asked the mayor about that, and I want to play some of that in a second, but before we do that, I'll go to our politics editor, Ted, right? So look, as Alex just said, it has to go to the Senate. Sam Zurier, state senator, is the bill's sponsor here.
The only Providence senator who was willing to sponsor it as of last weekend anyway.
You might be kind of answering my question. I mean, how much headwind do you think it could be? And I don't want to make you predict, but I'm going to make you predict.
I mean, it's obviously, no politician likes votes about raising taxes. Right. And so it's kind of...
Last time I checked, though, it's an odd year.
Yeah, well, it's state reps, but this is amounts people are going to notice. 7.5% levy increase versus 4%. So, you have state reps and senators out of Providence. By the way, Brett Smiley doesn't necessarily have a huge number of deeply loyal allies among the Providence delegation, right, who are going to go to the mat no matter what he's proposing just because they're like that. So, there's this tax increase that's not going to be popular. Maybe they don't feel a deep personal loyalty to the mayor. I can see why a lot of reps and senators, don't want to be part of this. That said, Zurier's case to the senators and to the reps is, I was on the city council during the crisis when Angel Taveras was mayor. This is the plan the mayor and the council want. We should give them the tools they're asking for to run the city as they see fit. So I do think we've all been talking, Alex in particular, Eli and I as well, with folks around City Hall, folks at the Assembly, that clearing that House panel is a sign that they should be able to vote. Because don't forget, even if they don't say anything publicly, Speaker Shekarchi, Governor McKee, Senate President Lawson, they have an incentive in not throwing a total monkey wrench into Providence's finances with failed votes up at the State House, because it's a city-state. If Providence goes into a financial crisis, the state's going to have to figure that out and feel the effects too.
All right, so as I said, you asked the mayor, if it doesn't pass, what then? And here is what he had to say.
If we're not able to raise the tax levy to the level that we need, then it's going to have to come from additional cuts, and those cuts will affect services. And so that's really the plan D to get a balanced budget. And we would talk to the council about that, but the budget is in fact in their hands at this point.
It's in their hands. kind of hands off. That's how I took it. I don't know.
Yeah, he's giving himself a little bit of an out there. Like, even, if this doesn't go through, it is now beholden on the council to figure this out. So he's, maybe giving himself a little political room there too.
Right, and he talked about Plan D. We had referenced earlier in the interview. I said, this budget's probably your Plan B, and then so what's the Plan C? And that didn't exist. He is really confident that he has the votes. He says that, like you referenced, other communities have asked for this, but again, Providence is just getting a lot more attention because
it's Providence.
It's Providence.
We got to go to a break soon, but I guess to either Alex or Ted on this, or anyway. I felt like, to me, Mayor Jorge Elorza had a kind of a frosty relationship with the General Assembly. How would you categorize Mayor Brett Smiley's relationship with lawmakers?
Well, I think Elorza, in particular, I think sometimes had problems with leadership. He had a particularly frosty relationship with Senate President Ruggiero and the people around him, at least at first. I remember years ago when Dan McGowan was in your job covering City Hall, he would get often, scuttlebutt about, frostiness, coolness, etc. So I think Smiley, is a bit of a better operator than Elorza was.
Yeah, I think he knows. He doesn't let everything show on his face. He'll be the more composed one at times, and I think that has an advantage for him.
More diplomatic.
Yeah, more diplomatic, and he's really just playing the facts. He's a pretty here are the facts. Here's what's going to happen. I'm not going to get too heated about this.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, Ted pointed this out to me. This sort of has been flying under the radar a little bit till now. The World Cup is coming to Foxborough, or a piece of it. What it could mean for Providence. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White, alongside 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi, a reporters roundtable with Target 12 investigators Eli Sherman and Alexandra Leslie. And we're going to dip back into an interview that Alex did this week with Providence Mayor Brett Smiley. And we're going to focus on the World Cup coming to Foxborough, or at least a portion of it. They're hosting how many games?
7.
7 games. And you asked Mayor Smiley about the role Providence could play. Take a listen.
This is going to, I think, cause us to learn how to do even bigger events, but we have a good track record. We just had a terrific experience hosting the NCAA basketball tournament. We've had other major events here. I think this will be the biggest event we've ever had, but we've got smart, capable people on staff. Hopefully the City Council sees fit to make sure we have a budget allocation to ensure that we can have a safe experience, but this is going to be an opportunity for us to grow and show that we're ready for the big time.
Big time. All right. So you reported that Providence is looking to be a...
Cianci would never have said ready for the big time. Cianci would have said we're already big time.
Yeah, that's right. Providence is looking to be a base camp, which sounds very military to me. But so what does that mean?
Well, so it basically means that Providence would not be a host city. Like, Boston is technically the host city, but it's really Foxborough because it's at Gillette.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. But Providence would essentially have, a place where a team, a qualified team for the World Cup, could practice and then also stay at, so lodging. Right now, they're looking at Johnson & Wales University and the Graduate Hotel to be those 2 places. And I think this would also include, friends and family of the team, not just the team itself. So they have those places to stay, but there's kind of a process that goes into picking these base camps. So FIFA has announced so far there's 14 options, but they have not fully decided on anything yet.
Do you have a sense as to when that?
Yeah, so at the later this year, I actually spoke to someone on FIFA over the phone in Switzerland, which was pretty cool. They just said, we're expecting more announcements, more options to be announced at the end of the year. And then, or later this year, and then by December, the teams will have their final selections. Then there'll be a lottery, and then at some point, everything will be announced.
I thought it was interesting too that in your story, the suggestion that maybe not just the team and their families would be here, but that then becomes a lure for that team's fans too to like converge in that city.
I was thinking, we were joking yesterday when she got the story, how funny it would be to reach the highest pinnacle of making your national team, getting to go to the World Cup, coming all the way to America, and then staying in at Johnson & Wales' door. No offense to Johnson & Wales, but just, there was quite the, when she told me that, it just hit the ear.
And I'll just say it real quick, Washington Bridge. We could be hosting a major. Now, and look, I know 95 too, but the other way you can get to Foxborough, and a lot of people use it. When I go to see the Patriots, I go up 24, and so that we know the bridge isn't going to be done, and that is not a great look for the city.
You know, I just want to point out one thing. The weekend before the bridge was officially shut down, the Army-Navy game was in town.
Oh, that's right.
And to think if it had happened just a few days earlier, the logistical nightmare that would have been.
Well, we'll find out.
At this point, we at least have a bridge with two-way traffic. So.
That's true.
And people should be keeping an eye on it because we expect some news coming up on the Washington Bridge. Next Friday is technically the deadline for when the two finalists, contractors for the RFP process, have to put in their price proposals. I'm not 100% sure whether or not we'll see that, but June 7th is when
that's when they rip open the envelopes.
June
6th.
Ooh. That's like because they have to give their bids in two pieces. Here's like how I want to build the bridge. Here's the design. Here's how we'd staff it with, and then to keep the bidding process to like look at that organically without knowing the cost of it. Separately, they submit I think it's an envelope of price, and they rip the envelopes open to see how much. And they're like, I love this beautiful bridge you're going to build us, and they rip it open. It's a $2 billion bridge. You know, you're like, okay, well maybe we have to look at the cost on the other one now.
But that RFP process is supposed to be awarded in
June
a couple weeks. So
D-Day.
Yeah.
Well, since we're talking money, I'd like you to boil down the state budget. We talked about the big, beautiful build in the first half of the program. As we approach June, this is really going to start heating up. And just to me, the headlines can paint a very different picture of what lawmakers are dealing with. Oh, we have 65 million extra bucks, and then here comes Lucy with the football, right?
Well, this is probably one of the most confusing times of the year for people as they hear different headlines about the budget, because you hear tax revenue estimates go up, but then you hear about a surplus from last year, but maybe we've already kind of allocated that. The very bottom line is, as you said, there's about $65 million more estimated to be available to lawmakers to put together the final budget bill over the coming weeks than Governor McKee had available in January when he put the budget bill in at the beginning of this process. But there's already like $40 million in additional costs as well for K-12 and union contracts, and then a host of other things going on. The RIPTA deficit, do they want to deal with that? There's no money for the bridge yet. The truck tolls aren't turned on, et cetera, et cetera. So I think largely the situation just hasn't changed much. It's a challenging budget year and a huge change from the big COVID relief-driven surpluses of recent years.
Could there be, we have less than a minute, could there be a Hasbro element to it at all, or is that sort of off the table? I mean,
the governor has said if Hasbro wants to stay in Rhode Island and take them up on the big, beautiful deal they've offered to Hasbro, that costs some money, and they need to know to finish the budget up. I would say there are not a lot of people at the State House making plans based on the idea Hasbro is staying at the moment. They'd like them to, but I don't think that's the operating assumption in a lot of offices.
All right, Ted Nesi, Alexandra Leslie, Eli Sherman, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for watching. You can catch our podcast, scan that QR code. I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.